Anytime we get large numbers of people together, there is of course always a risk of transmission. The Black Lives Matter movement, and in particular about police violence against Black and minority ethnic communities. This is something that we also consider to be a public health problem. Having said that, we are of course still in a global infectious disease pandemic caused by the new coronavirus. And it's really important that if people feel like they want to take part in these protests, we make these as safe as possible. Now the upside is lots of these protests, or most of them, are taking place outside. And this probably does reduce transmission risk significantly because any particles that come from your nose or mouth will quickly dissipate into the atmosphere where they won't hurt anyone. I think that it's important to note that anytime you get large numbers of people together, it will never be a no-risk situation.
It turns out that managing crowds is called crowd dynamics. Paul Townsend runs a company that models crowds at events and in venues and public spaces.
We define a crowd as anywhere where a certain number of people are gathered together, because we deal with pedestrian crowds such as on shopping streets, where they don't have a common purpose. There's individual groups that are moving around. And we also deal with large crowds such as in Mecca with 3 million people gathered together, all who have a very common purpose and set target. And the simulations that we use, essentially dots moving around on a screen, they all have a certain behaviour where they don't want to come close to other people or close to other objects. And collectively, that defines how crowds might move in a certain density, at a certain speed. We tend to look at a protest like we look at any other event. People are gathering for a purpose. But it means that we can simulate certain behaviours of the crowd. For example, if they're trying to go past a line of police officers that are asking them to stop, we can actually simulate the impact and build-up of a crowd in that situation, which will give the police officers much better awareness of the situation before it even happens.
Crowd dynamic software is usually used to predict movement and optimise layouts to avoid overcrowding.
It's very difficult to know what a single person's going to do. We can start to understand that the emergent behaviour of a crowd of people all together is predictable, whereas an individual, given all the psychology we have as individual humans, is much less so predictable. I'm sure anyone who's been to a supermarket in the crisis, especially earlier on, knows that there was a new way to shop, and you can actively see people steering around one another. It certainly affected how we visited public spaces, where we've seen people doing exercise, actively avoiding people that they would have just brushed past before, people sitting much further apart in parks, and so on.
Crowd dynamics can factor in these behaviours to help organisers plan future sporting events, music festivals, or any big gathering of people with the pandemic in mind.
Is there a basic list of the changes that will have to be made as a result of COVID to your algorithms?
There's various different models that we use in different situations, depending on whether it's a very large, widespread area where we don't need to look at the crowds in so much detail, or having individuals in the model that are moving but seeing the crowd behaviour that comes from that. And we've put in certain ways to measure when people are within 2 metres within the models, so that we can then consider in certain situations what the best new design might be or the best management might be.
How is that going to change the way we live going forward? Because are we now moving into an era where we can't go to festivals and pop concerts and theatres or even shops in the way that we used to?
And with the venues currently reopening, as more and more entertainment venues or attractions, museums or even concerts start to reopen, I'm sure immediately we'll see a very different way of attending them because people are trying to keep further apart. It's also affected how people are assessing the capacity of these venues. How many people can I get in a shop or a festival? There's a whole mix of ways that they're doing that, but I think even beyond the current 2 metre rule, even if that goes to 1 metres or there's some different guidance, the actual behaviour of the crowds is still going to be different for a certain period. We don't know how long that period is, I think we're going to find that in general the space available is going to increase at some of these events. So the space per person available will increase somehow. And as government policies change, and as the science behind how the virus might spread and what's actually needed changes, that'll determine what that actually looks like. But this will get back to what we consider to be a normal crowd at some point in the future, but we don't know when. And that means in that interim period, we need more research to be done right now, actually, to determine what normal is now for crowds.